Chapter 8 of Falcons of Narabedla by Marion Zimmer Bradley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 8 Falcons of Everin. I pulled my cloak closer about me, prickling with excitement, as I knelt between Rafe and Carol in the tree platform. Just beneath me, Narayan clung to a lower branch. My ears picked up the ring of distant hooves on frozen ground, and I smiled. I knew every nuance of this hunt, and Everin might find his deadly birds not so obedient to his call today. Not a scrap of me remembered another world where a dazed and bewildered man had flown at a living bird with his pocket-knife. Coldly, I found myself considering possibilities. A snare there must be, but who? Narayan himself? No. He was my only protection until I got clear of this riffraff. Besides, if he ever unsheathed his power, unguarded like this, he could drain me as a spider sucks a trapped fly. No, it would have to be Rafe. I had a grudge against the fat man anyway. I pulled at his sleeve. "Wait for me here," I said cunningly, and made as if to leave the platform. Rafe walked smiling into the trap. "Here, Adric. Narayan gave orders you weren't to run into any danger." "Good, good. I didn't even have to order the man to his death. He volunteered." "Well," I protested, "we want a scout out to carry word when they come." As if we wouldn't know. "I'll go," Rafe said laconically, and leaned past me, touching Narayan's shoulder. He explained in a whisper. We were all whispering, although there was no reason for it, and Narayan nodded. "Good idea. Don't show yourself." I held back laughter, as if that would matter. The man swung down into the road. I heard his footsteps ring on the rock, heard them diminish, die in distance. Then a clamoring, bestial cry ripped the air, a cry that seemed to ring and echo up out of hell, a cry no human throat could compass, but I knew who had screamed. That settled the fat man. Narayan jerked around, his blond face whiter. "Rafe!" The word was a prayer. We half scrambled, half leaped into the road. Side by side, we ran down the road together. The screaming of a bird warned me. I looked up, dodged quickly. Over my head, a huge scarlet falcon, wide-winged, wheeled and darted in at me. Narayan's yell cut the air, and I ducked, flinging a fold of cloak over my head. I ripped a knife from my belt, slashed upward, ducking my head, keeping one arm before my eyes. The bird wavered away, hung in the air, watching me with live green eyes that shifted with my every movement. The falcon's trappings were green, bright against the scarlet wings. I knew who had flown this bird. The falcon wheeled, banking like a plane, and rushed in again. No egg had hatched these birds. I knew who had shaped these slapping pinions. Over one corner of my cloak I saw Narayan pull his pistol-like electro-rod and screamed warning. "Drop it! Quick!" The birds could turn gunfire as easily as could Everin himself, and if the falcon drew one drop of my blood, then I was lost forever, slave to whoever had flown the bird. I thrust upward with the knife, dodging between the bird's wings. Men leaped toward us, knives out and ready. The bird screamed wildly, flew upward a little ways, and hung watching us with those curiously intelligent eyes. Another falcon and another winged across the road, and a thin, uncanny screeing echoed in the icy air. I heard the jingle of little bells. 3 birds, golden-trapped and green-trapped and harnessed in royal purple, swung above us. 3 pairs of unwinking jewel eyes hung motionless in a row. Beyond them, the darkening red sun made a line of blackening trees and silhouetted 3 figures, a horse, motionless against the background of red sky. Everin, Idris, and Karami, intent on the falcon play, 3 traitors baiting the one who had escaped their hands. The falcons poised, swept inward in massed attack. They darted between my knife and Narayan's. Behind me a bestial scream rang out, and I knew one of the falcons, at least, had drawn blood. that one of the men behind us was not ours. Turning and stumbling, the stricken man ran blindly through the clearing, down the road. Halfway to those silhouetted figures he reeled, tripping across the body of a man who lay beneath his feet. Narayan gave a gasping, retching sound, and I whirled in time to see him jerk out his electro-rod spasmodically and fire shot after wild shot at the stumbling figure that had been our man. "Fire!" he panted to me. "Don't let him. He wouldn't want to get to them." I struck the weapon down. "Idiot," I said savagely. "Some hunting they must have." Narayan began protesting, and I wrenched the rod from his hand. The man was far beyond firing range now. At Narayan's convulsed face, I nearly swore aloud. This weak fool would ruin everything. I said hastily, "Don't waste your fire. We can take care of them later." I waved a quick hand at the three on the ridge. "There is no help for those caught by Evren's birds." Narayan breathed hard, bracing himself in the road. I beckoned the others close. "Don't fire on the birds," I cautioned tensely. "It only energizes them. They drain the energy from your fire. Use knives. Cut their wings. Look out!" The falcons, like chain lightning, traced thin orbits down in a slapping confusion of wings and darting beaks. I backed away from the purple-harnessed birds, flicking up my cloak, beating at the flapping wings. Our men, standing in a closed circle back to back, fought them off with knives and with the ends of their cloaks thrown up, swatting them off. And 3 times I heard the inhuman scream. 3 times I heard the lurching footsteps as a man, not human anymore, broke from us and ran blindly to the distant ridge. I heard Narayan shouting, whirling swiftly to face him. He ran to me, beating back the green-trapped bird that darted in and out on swift, agile wings. The screeing of the falcons, the flapping of cloaks, the panting of men hard-pressed, gave the whole scene a nightmare unrealness in which the only real thing was Narayan, fighting at my side. His gasp of inhuman effort made me whirl, by instinct flinging up my cloak to protect my back, my knife thrust out to cover his throat. He raked a long gash across the down-turned head of the falcon, was rewarded with an unbird-like scream of agony and the spasmodic open and shut of the razor talons. They raked out, clawing. They furrowed a slash in the dreamer's arm. The razor beak darted in, ready to cut. I threw myself forward, unprotected, off balance, ready to strike. At the last minute, talons and beak turned aside, drew back, darted swiftly, straight at me, and my knife was turned aside, guarding Narayan. But Narayan jerked aside. His knife fell in the road, his arm shot out, grabbed the bird behind the head, twisting convulsively so the stabbing needle of a beak could not reach him. The darting head lunged, pecking at the cloak that wrapped his forearm. Thrown forward, I stumbled against Narayan, carried by my own momentum, and we fell in a tangle of cloaks and knives and thrashing legs and wings, a-sprawl in the road. The deadly talons raked my face and his, but Narayan hung on grimly, holding the deadly beak away. I thrust with the knife again and again. Thin yellow blood spurted in great gushes, splattering us both with burning venom. I snatched the wounded bird from the dreamer's weakening hands, twisted till I heard the lithe neck snap in my fingers. The bird slumped, whatever had given it life gone. And high on the ridge, the dwarfed figure of Idris threw up his hands, fell, collapsed across the pommel of his saddle. Narayan's breath went out limply in a long sigh as we untangled our twisted bodies. Our eyes met as we mopped away the blood. We grinned spontaneously. I liked this man. Almost I wished I need not send him back to trance dream. What a waste. He said quietly, "There is a life between us now." I twisted my face into a smile matching his. "That's only one," I said. "The rest—" I turned, watching for a moment as the falcons tore at the ring of men. "Come on," Narayan shouted, and we flung ourselves into the breach. I flung down my knife, snatched a sword from someone, and swung it in great arcs, which seemed somehow right and natural to me. The men scattered before the sword like scared chickens, and I went mad with hate, sweeping the sword in vicious semicircles against the lashing birds. The sword cut empty air, and I realized startlingly that both birds lay cut to ribbons at my feet, their blood staining the dead leaves. Narayan's eyes swam, through a red haze, into my field of vision. They were watching me, trouble and fright in their grayness. I forced myself to sanity, dropped the sword atop the dead birds. I wiped my forehead. "That's that," I said banally. We took toll of our losses, silently. Narayan, gasping with pain, rubbed a spot of the yellow blood from his face. "That stuff burns," he grimaced. I laughed tightly. He didn't have to tell me. We'd both have badly festered burns to deal with tomorrow, but now there was work. "Look!" One of the men stared and pointed upward, his face tense with fright. Another great bird of prey hung on poised pinions above us, sapphire eyes intent. But as we watched, it wheeled and swiftly winged toward the Rainbow City. Not, however, before I caught the azure shimmer of the bells and harness. A thin, sweet tinkling came from the flying bells, like a mocking echo of the spell-singer's voice. Gamine. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9 of Falcons of Narabedla by Marion Zimmer Bradley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9. The Return of Adric. Back in the windowless house, we snatched a hurried meal, cared for our slashed cuts, and tried to plan further. The others had not been idle while we fought the Falcons. All day Narayan's vaunted army had been accumulating, I could hardly say assembling, in that great bowl of land between Narabedla and the Dreamer's Keep. There were perhaps 4,000 men, armed with clumsy powder weapons, with worn swords that looked as if they had been long buried, with pitchforks, scythes, even with rude clubs viciously knobbed. I had been put to it to conceal my contempt for this ragtag and bobtail of an army, and Narayan proposed to storm Rainbow City with this. I was flabbergasted at the confidence these men had in their young leader. So much the better, I thought. Take him from them, and they'll scatter to their rat holes and crofts again. I felt my lips twisting in a bitter smile. They trusted Adric too. When I had shown myself to them, their shouts had made the very trees echo. Well, again the ironic smile came unbidden. That was just as well too. When Narayan was reprisoned, I could use the power of their lost leader to tear down what he himself had built. The thought was exquisitely funny. "What are you laughing about?" Narayan asked. We were lounging on the steps of the house, watching the men thronging around the camp. His slumberous grey eyes held deep sparks of fire, and without waiting for my answer, he went on. "Think of it, the curse of the Dreamer's magic lifted. What would it mean to this land, Adric? It means life, hope, for millions of people." In a way, Narayan was right. I could remember when I had shared that dream, when it had seemed somehow more worthy than a dream of personal power. Sonara came down the steps, bent and slipped her soft arms around my shoulder, and I drew her down. A volcano of hate so great I must turn my face away burned up in me. This man was my equal. No, I admitted grudgingly, my superior, and I hated him for it. I hated him because I knew that in his dream of power no one must suffer. I hated him because once I had been weak enough to share his feelings. I said abruptly, "Your plans are good, Narayan. There's just one thing wrong with them. They won't work. Storming Rainbow City won't get you anywhere. You could kill Karami slaves by the thousands, or the millions, or the billions, but you couldn't kill Karami, and you'd only leave her free to enslave others. You've got to strike at them when they're in the Dreamer's Keep. When the Dreamers wake is the only moment when they are vulnerable." "But how can we get to the Dreamer's Keep, Adric? They go guarded 100 times over there." "What's your army for?" I asked him roughly. "To knock down haycocks? Send your men to chase off the guards. I told you I could handle Reese, if it came to that. He'll get us through to the Dreamer's Keep if need be." "What about Gamine?" Sonara asked practically. Gamine was the least of my worries, but I did not tell Sonara that. I listened to her comments and suggestions a little contemptuously. Didn't they know that when the Dreamers woke, the Narabedlans were vulnerable, to the Dreamers alone? If I were there with Narayan, there was no question about who would win. Sonara scowled at the rip of talons across my face. "You're hurt, and you never told me," she accused. "Come this minute and let me take care of it." I almost laughed. Me, Adric of the Crimson Tower, being ordered around by a little country girl. I snorted, but spoke pleasantly. "I'll live, I expect. Come and sit here with us." I pulled her down at my side, but she leaned her head on her brother's knee, an unquietness in her face. She was a pretty thing, although the cause of all my troubles. When I redeemed her from Karami's slaves, for a whim, I had not known she was Narayan's sister. Xandru's hells, but I had made a ghastly slip. I had told Narayan there was no help for those touched by the birds, when I myself had redeemed his own sister. Had he noticed? Would he attribute it to Karami's meddling with my mind? I smothered an exclamation, and Sonara and Narayan looked up anxiously. "You are hurt, Adric." I shook my head. I fancied Narayan looking at me with suspicion, but I controlled myself. I reached out to draw Sonara to me, but she had drawn back, rising lithely to her feet, like a dove poised for flight. Only her hands, small darting hands like candle flames, remained in mine to pull me lightly to my feet. I tried to hold her, but she protested. "There is so much to be done," and I raised the slim hands to my lips before I let her go. The gesture pleased her, I could see, so much that I watched with contempt as she tripped away. Silly, simple girl. It would please her. In the end, it was only Narayan and Sonara who rode with me to Rainbow City. Carroll had taken the army in sections to set an ambush for Karami's guards. We rode in the opposite direction, by a twisting side road. Sonara rode beside me, her dark eyes glowing. There was dainty witchery in Sonara, and a pretty trust that made me smile and promise recklessly, "We will win." It pleased me to think that I could comfort Sonara for her brother's downfall. Once conditioned to Rainbow City, she would forget her silly fancies and be a fair and lovely comrade. If she continued to please me, it would be amusing to see this unformed country girl wield the power that had belonged to Karami the Golden. It took us an hour of hard riding to reach the lip of the great cup of land, where we paused, looking down the dark, almost straight avenue of trees that led to the walls of Rainbow City. I whistled tunelessly between my teeth. Whatever we do, it will be wrong. We'd be taking quite a chance to ride up to the main gate. At the same time, they'll be expecting us to sneak in the back way. They'd never expect us to come by the front avenue. "The deer walks safest at the hunter's door," Narayan quoted, laughing. "But won't they be expecting us to use that kind of logic?" Sonara giggled, subsided at my frown. "At that rate," I said, "we could go on all night." Narayan reached overhead, snatching down a crackling sheaf of frostberries, selected one narrow pod. He held it between finger and thumb. "Chance. 2 seeds, we go around. 3, we ride straight up the main gate. Agreed?" I nodded, and he crushed the dry husk. 1, 2, 3 seeds rolled into my outstretched palm. "Fate," Narayan said with a shrug. "Ready then?" I jounced the seeds in my palm. 1 for Everin, and 1 for Idris, and 1 for Karami, I said contemptuously, and flung the little black balls into the road. "We'll scatter them like that." We were lucky. The drive was deserted. If there were guards out for us at all, they had been posted somewhere on the secret paths, straight toward the towers we rode, under the westering red sun, and just before dusk we checked our horses and tethered them within a mile of the Rainbow City, going forward cautiously on foot. I objected to this arrangement. "I'll get in alone," I told them. "If anything happens to me, we mustn't lose you as well." "I'll stay," said Narayan briefly. "If anything goes wrong, I'll be here to help." Silently I damned the man's loyalty, but there was nothing I could say without spoiling the illusion I had worked so hard to create. I took his hand for a minute. "Thank you." His voice was equally abrupt. "Good luck, Adric." Sonara glanced at me briefly and away again. I walked away from them without looking back. It was easy enough to find my way into the labyrinthine towers. I was not Lord of the Crimson Tower without knowing its secrets. I climbed the stairs swiftly, ransacked the place. To no avail. When she took my memories, Karamie had also been careful to take everything which could conceivably give me any power over any of the dreamers, even old Reese. I went up more stairs till I stood at the very pinnacle of the tower, in Adric's star room, into which I had been catapulted. Was it less than 3 days ago? I stood at the high window, vaguely thinking of an older Adric, an Adric who had watched the stars here, and not alone. I traced back through the years, diving down deep into the seas of sudden memory, and brought up the knowledge of— "Mike Kenscott," said a voice behind me, and I whirled to look into the face of a man I had never seen before. He had the primitive look of a man out of some forgotten past. I had seen such men as I swam in the light of the time ellipse. He was tall and clean-shaven. He looked athletic. His eyes were a ridiculous color, dark brown. He had hair. He looked angry, if he could be said to have an expression. But he spoke, clearly and with a deliberate calm. "Well, Mike Kenscott," he said in a language I had never heard, but found myself understanding perfectly, "you have taken my place very nicely. I suppose I should thank you. You have given me freedom, and Narayan's trust. The rest I can do for myself." He laughed. "In fact, you're so much me that I'm not much of myself. But I can force you back into your own body." The man must be mad. At any rate, he'd insulted the Lord Adric in his own tower, and by Xandru's eyelashes he'd pay for it. I flung myself at him with a yell of rage. My fingers dug into his throat. And I cried out in the stifling clutch of lean fingers grabbing at me, biting at my neck, my shoulders. An agonizing wrench shuddered over my body. I faced Adric. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10 of Falcons of Narabedla by Marion Zimmer Bradley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 10. When the Dreamers Wake. Of course I understood, even while I fought, dizzy and reeling, to loose the death grip I had put on my own body. I was back. I was Mike Kenscott again. Adric loosed his hands of his own will and stepped away, breathing hard. "Thank you," he said in the raw voice that had been mine for so long. "I myself could hardly have done better." With a swift movement, he snatched something from a little recess in the wall, pointed, and fired point blank. A lance of grey mist stabbed out at me. To my amazement, only a pleasant heat warmed me. I had enough split-second reasoning reflex left to fall in a slumped huddle to the ground. I knew that that was what he expected. Adric fumbled in his pockets, took out the little mirror I had taken from Everin, still wrapped in its protective silk. I watched, breathless, between narrowed eyelids. If he would only open it. But instead he gave a shudder of disgust and flung it straight at me. With a braced, agonizing effort, I made myself lie perfectly still, without flinching to avoid the blow. The mirror struck my forehead. I felt blood break to the surface and trickle wetly down my face. I heard Adric moving, heard receding steps and the risp of a closing door. He was gone. I moved. To this day, I am not sure how I escaped death from Adric's weapon, but I think it was because I was in my own body. After I had touched Adric the first time, I was immune to Earth electricity. In this world, I think, I was immune to their force. I wiped the blood from my temple. Good Lord, there was Narayan, waiting with Sonara. I forgot that I had plotted against Narayan, remembering only that I had liked the man. I couldn't let Adric get to them. I grabbed the mirror, crammed it into a pocket. Against the nightmare haste that drove me, I ran to the closet, quickly from the racks of weapons chose a short, ugly knife. I didn't need swordsman's training to use that. Thank God, I knew my way around. I could remember everything I'd done when I was Adric. But wait, I could also remember what he had done when he was me. That meant Adric could remember everything I had done and planned with Narayan. This crazy business of identity. Even now, could I be sure which of us was who? I dashed out of the room, ran down the endless stairs 3 at a time. At the entrance to Gamin's blue tower, a dangerous whirring of wings beat around me. I staggered, almost fell backward. One of the murderous falcons, the one in blue, darted, hanging poised in the stairwell above me. I backed against the wall, hoping the bird would not attack. Gamin had not flown falcon with the others. The strong wings flapped in the closed space. I saw the dart of the vicious little beak. Blindly, I struck upward with the knife, shielding my eyes with the other hand, and was rewarded with a splatter of thin burning blood and a scream of unbirdlike agony. I ducked beneath the thrashing wings, and ran on up the stairs. Behind me the dying falcon flapped, threshed and rolled down the stairs, a tangle of wings, landing far below with a flailing thump. I was not quite sure what I meant to do. As I climbed, I thought swiftly. Gamin was no friend to Adric, I knew that. Adric had known much of Gamin and Rhys, and I drew on that knowledge. But even Adric had not known much of the spell-singer cloaked in that blurred halo of invisibility. Had he ever seen Gamin? What was Adric doing now? I had served him well, won him Narayan's trust, then turned him loose again in his own body, to destroy, betray them. I hated Adric as I hope I may never hate again. And yet I could not hate him wholly. To know all is to forgive much, and I had lived for 3 days and nights in Adric's body and brain. Knowing his strengths and his weaknesses, his dreams and torments, I could not condemn him utterly. A man may be forgiven much that he does for a woman's bewitchments, and few men could be blamed for allowing Kermie to enslave them. Adric had done good once, too. He had freed the dreamer. He had loved, but he had trapped me here, and for that my hate would make him pay thoroughly. A shadow flitted across my sight. The robed Gamin barred my way, an air of cold amusement around the poise of the hood and the blurred invisible head. The spell-singer laughed, mocking. "How like you this body, Adric? You are beaten now, for sure. The stranger works with Narayan, in your body, Adric." "I am not Adric," I shouted. "Adric's in his own body again. He's going after Narayan." "You expect me to believe that?" Contempt stung me in Gamin's clear, sexless voice. "Let me to Rhys," I begged. "He'll know I'm telling the truth. Damn it, let me by." Infuriated by the mocking laughter, I thrust my arm to move Gamin forcibly from my path. Whatever Gamin was, man, woman, imp or boy, it was not human. Steel wires writhed between my hands. I struggled impotently in that bone-breaking grip. Then, with a swift impulse, thrust my hand quickly at the blurred invisibility where Gamin's face should have been. Gamin screamed, a thin cry of horror. Suddenly I knew where I had been those 2 weeks I lay in the hospital, when Adric lay, in my body, gone mad, in the hospital in my place. An instinct I had grown to trust warned me to pull away sharply from Gamin's relaxed grip. I shouldered by and ran like hell. Halfway up the stairs, I heard the spell-singer's feet running behind me, and I quickened my stride and sprinted for the heavy door that barred my way. I could feel Rhys' presence behind the door. I threw my weight against the door, twisting the handle frantically. The door was locked. Behind me, I heard the padding tread of Gamin. Hopelessly, I put my back to the door, pulling my knife out again, and defied the creature. Behind me, the door suddenly opened, and I was flung backward, sprawling into the room within. "Well, Mike," the old tired voice of Rhys said, "Gamin is a fool, but you are no better. Yes, I knew you were coming. I knew Adric is going. I know where Narayan is, and I know what they plan to do. There is only one person who can stop all this, Mike Kenscott. You." Gaping stupidly, I picked myself up from the floor. The old dreamer, his wrinkled face serene under the peaked hood, watched me placidly. "What? How?" I stammered. "Gamin is a prescient, and I am not a complete fool." Rhys smiled wearily. The dreamy look of the very old or the very young was on his face. "I cannot help you, but I will make Gamin help." The spell-singer came into the room, and I could almost see resentment through that strange halo of nothingness. "Gamin," Rhys said, "it is time. You and Narayan must go with him to the Dreamer's Keep." "No," Gamin whispered in protest. "Narayan cannot go. His talisman was destroyed. Only outside the tower. He cannot go in." "There is still mine. Give it to him." At Gamin's cry of dismay, Rhys' voice was suddenly a whiplash. "Give it to him, Gamin. I still have power to compel that. What does it matter what happens to me? I am old. It is Narayan's turn. Your turn." "I'll keep it for Narayan," Gamin faltered. "No!" Rhys spoke sharply. "While you keep it, and I am bound to you, there is still the bondage. Give it to him." Gamin sobbed harshly. From the silken veils she drew forth a small jeweled thing, wrapped in insulating silk like Everin's mirror. She untwisted the silk. It was a tiny sword. Not a dagger, but a perfectly modeled sword. A toy. Everin's too, but different. I recalled that Everin had called himself Toymaker. Gamin clung to it, the robed shoulders bent. "Mike must take it." Rhys' voice was gentler. "If you keep it, I am still bound to you. If Adric had it, it would bind Narayan again. If Mike keeps it, near Narayan, Narayan is free. Free to go where he will, even in the Dreamer's Keep. Give it to him, Gamin." Rhys sat down wearily, as if the effort of speech had tired him past bearing. I stood and listened with a rebellious patience. I was eager to be gone, but my eyes were on the little jeweled toy in Gamin's hands. It winked blue. It shimmered. It pulsed with a curious heartbeat, hypnotic. Rhys watched too, his tired face intent and almost eager. "Gamin, if Adric had seen you, had remembered—" "I want him to remember!" Gamin's low wail keened weirdly in the silent room. Rhys sighed. "I am Narabedlan," he said at last. "I could not destroy my own people. Gamin is not bound, nor you, Mike Kenscott. I suppose I am a traitor, but when I was born, Narabedla was a fair city, without so many crimes on its head. Go and warn Narayan, Mike." Gamin hovered near me, intent, jealous, the shrouded eyes fixed on Rhys. The old man spoke on in a fading voice. "My poor city. Now, Gamine, now. Give it to him, and let me rest. Stand away from me, Mike, well away. I do not want the bondage again from you." I did not understand, and stood stupidly still. Gammon gave me an angry push. "Over there, you fool!" I reeled, recovered my balance, stood about 6 feet from the couch where Rhys half sat, half lay. The old man laid one wrinkled hand on the toy sword Gamine held. He took his hand away. "Now," he said quietly. Gamine thrust the sword into my hand, and I felt a sudden stinging shock, like electric current, jolt my whole body. I saw Gamine's robed body shiver with the same jolt. The toy in my hand was suddenly heavy, heavy as if it were made of lead, and the tiny winking in the hilt was darkened. The peaked hood of Rhys drooped until it covered the face. Gamine caught my arm roughly, and the steel of those narrow fingers bit to the bone as they hauled me almost bodily from the room. I heard the echo of a sob in the spell-singer's whispering croon. "Rhys, farewell." The next thing I knew, we were racing side by side down flight after flight of stairs. Together we fled through the subterranean passages of Rainbow City. Outside, in the pillared court, a man ran toward us. His brown tunic was ripped and torn, his blond hair was rumpled. A smudge of blood reddened his forehead. I gasped, "Narayan!" The man whirled, saw us, pulled his weapon from his belt. There was no time for explanations. I threw myself at his knees in a flying tackle no football coach would approve, but it did the trick. Narayan went down under me, kicking. Gamine was not one to stand aside in a fight. The robed figure rocketed forward, flung itself on the prone Narayan, holding him motionless with that steely strength. I wrenched the electrode from Narayan's relaxed fingers. "Listen," I urged. "I am not one of Karami's men. Gamine, let him up." "He's got Sonara," the dreamer muttered dizzily. "Sonara. Who in Xandru's hells are you?" He picked himself up, gazing at me with a stunned, blank look. "My name's Kenscott," I said briefly. Suddenly, feeling it was the best way to establish my good faith, I pulled out the toy Gamine had put in my hand. "I've seen Rhys. He sent this." Narayan stared at the thing in my hand, a double grief in his young face. "Rhys," he muttered. "I felt he was gone." With bent head, he reached out to take the small thing from me. In his hand it came alive. The small jeweled toy seemed suddenly brilliant, flaring, dazzling with a wild burst of faceted light, blue, golden, crimson, flame color. Gamine's low, sweet voice breathed, "In the dreamer's hands." "In my hands," Narayan murmured in a choked, almost a tranced ecstasy. I broke in on their raptures rudely. "Here, Narayan, is it Adric who's got Sonara?" He gulped, swallowed hard, thrust the toy into a pocket and came back to himself, but that light was still in his eyes. He spoke with a hard restraint. "Yes, Adric surprised me, knocked me out. When I came to, they were gone." He blinked once or twice, rubbed his eyes, then resolutely fumbled for the little toy and extended it to me. "Here, keep this till we get to the Dreamer's Keep." I took it without comment. Gamine slipped away, came back leading horses. "I couldn't find a single guard," the cold voice murmured. "I wonder where they are." "Adric knows," said Narayan, tight-lipped. We mounted. The wind was rising. Above us the moon swung slowly in an indigo sky. Sparks flew from our hooves against the frosty stones. We were racing against time, and a nightmare panic had me while I gripped the saddle of my racing horse. It took all my concentration to stick on the animal's back, but I was acquiring balance and a feel for riding. The ill wind was blowing some good, I thought inanely. Narayan's blond hair was frosty pale in the moonlight, and the eerie Gamine was a nightmare ghost, a phantom from nowhere. Far away we heard the spatter of gunfire, the screams of dying men, the ring of swords and spears. Thinly, Gamine chanted in the night. Narayan's face looked haunted. "There are the guards. Attacking," he jerked out over the hoof noises. The scream of falcons rang swiftly above Gamine's chant. The too familiar beat of wings slapped around my head, and I flung up my arm to knock away one serpentine neck. My terrified horse plunged, and I rocked in the saddle, nearly falling. Another bird swooped down on Narayan. Another. Then there were swarms of them, gold and purple and green, crimson, blue, flame color. The air was thick with their wings. Gamine screamed. I saw Narayan beat the air with his cloak. The veiled spell-singer, crouched in the saddle, was lashing at them with the whip from her saddle. The lash kept the falcons at bay, but the razor talons caught at the blue shroudings. Narayan, whip in one hand, sword in the other, beat round him in great arcs, and I heard one bird's death cry sending ringing echoes to the sky. I flung round me with my knife. "The mirror!" screamed Gamine. "Everin's mirror! Quick, they're coming by millions!" They were coming in scores, hundreds, whirling and screeing. These were not the soul falcons, belled and elaborately endowed with the intelligence and cunning of their launcher. These were machines. Alive, yes, but not a life we knew. Only the nightmare freak of a science gone mad could produce, or control, these hateful things that were filling the clean air, groping for us with needle beaks and talons and wild wings. Only Everin. I fumbled blindly for the mirror, clumsily stripping the silks. A needle talon raked at my wrist, and by sheerest instinct I struck upward, turning the face of the mirror toward the bird. The bird reeled in mid-air, flapped, fell. A tingling shock rattled through my arm. I dropped the mirror, leaped to catch it. The thing was a perfect conductor. It drained energy. I knew now why Everin had been so anxious to have me, or Adric, look into its depths. It could have touched the energy waves of my brain through my eyes. The birds were brainless, all energy. I grabbed the mirror and held it upright. I caught a half-glimpse, from the tail of my eye, of the weird lightnings coiled inside it, but even that glimpse coiled my stomach in nervous knots. Shielding my face, I held it upward. The birds flew toward it, like a moth to the candle. Shock after shock flowed along my arm. 3 more of the horrible falcons fell limp, lifeless, drained. A strange exhilaration began to buoy me up. The force from the birds was not electricity, but a kindred force, which my nerves drank greedily. I thrust the mirror out, was rewarded again by the surge of power, and again the birds, this time by dozens, flapped and fell. Then, as if whatever had loosed the army of falcons had realized their uselessness, the whole remaining force of the birds wheeled and fled, winging swiftly over the land to the distant dungeon that rose high and far into the black midnight. Recalled to the Dreamer's Keep. End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11 of Falcons of Narabedla by Marion Zimmer Bradley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 11. The Last Sacrifice. The flow of strength had renewed me. I felt that I could face whatever came. I thrust Everin's mirror into my pocket, flung a word to Narayan, and we were riding again, Gamine racing behind us. The blue shroudings had been torn to ribbons by the snappings of the falcon claws. I could see the pallid gleam of naked flesh through the torn veils. The noise of battle behind us grew more distinct. I could make out the explosions and the distant flashes of colored flame. I shuddered. Even now that frightful army of falcons might be winging to join Adric and Everin. The rebels could kill some of them, but for every falcon dead there would be 20 more slaves for Narabedla. What could Narayan's men with their scythes and pitchforks and rusty guns do against the incredible science of a toy-maker? Narayan's strained face was ghastly in the moonlight. I needed no telepathy to read his thoughts. Slaughter for his men, what for his sister? Our horses seemed to lag, to drag through a mire of motionless, yet they were at the full gallop of their endurance. The sound of fighting grew closer. Everything in me cried out that I was an utter fool, riding full tilt into a battle in which I had no stake. Yet something else told me, coldly and with a grim truth, that all I possessed was what I might win today, for this was the only world I would ever know, that I would never see my own world again. Never. And Adric should rot in a hell of his own choosing for that. The sounds of fighting seemed very close. Narayan pulled up his horse so quickly that it nearly sent Gamine plunging into his back. He said in a low, concentrated voice, "Adric isn't at the battle. This way, quick." He whirled the horse and dashed down a side road at right angles to the way we had been riding. If we had raced before, now our horses seemed to fly. The battle raged behind us. I heard dim screams, the neighing of wounded horses, the muffled sound of earth flying upward, exploded in fire. But it had a dreamy, unreal quality, like noises through a nightmare. We had left the forest and were riding across a dark and hummocky plain. Moss patted our hoof noises. Now and then some small furry thing skittered across the track we were following, and twice my horse shied at swooping birds, and my heart stopped until I saw they were not the falcons of Everin. Stark and black against a treeless horizon, I could see the Dreamer's Keep, between the small crescents of the two lesser moons. The largest one rode a golden orbit over my head. I rode hunched in the saddle, my eyes on the vast cairn only a few miles away. Suddenly a vast arch of lightning spanned the sky above the Dreamer's Keep. Blue lightning. I heard Narayan groan like a man in his death agony. Twisting in my saddle, I saw brooding horror on his face, mingled with pain, and a terrified satisfaction. "The sacrifice. I still feel it," he breathed in labored gasps. "I still take from it. Mike! Mike!" His voice held unbearable torture, and the veins in the fair face stood out, black and congested with effort. "If I start to work for them, promise to shoot me." "Oh God," I gasped. "Mike, promise! Gamine!" Gamine spurred the horse to his side. I heard the low voice, sweet, almost crooning. Again the vast arch of blueness spanned the sky. Narayan dug spurs savagely into the side of his horse and raced ahead of us. On the plain, limned starkly against the sky, a horseman appeared. He rode low in the saddle, his horse carrying a double burden, but racing fleetly to the keep of the Dreamers. I cursed. I knew that lean crouched figure, knew it as well as my own. Adric rode to the sacrifice, and before him, limp across his saddle, he bore Senara. The rest of that nightmare ride is a blank in my mind. The next thing I remember clearly is reining up beneath the lee of the gaunt pile of rocks on rocks that was the Dreamer's Keep. There was no sign of Adric or Senara, no sign of any living person, nothing but the incandescent blue lightning that rayed out now every 4 seconds or so. Narayan's face was a white death mask, and Gamine's breathing came in short, sobbing pants. I alone was free from the effect. My body throbbed and tingled with the weird energy set free in the night. We flung ourselves from our horses. Gamine tugged futilely at the torn veilings to conceal her face, and for the first time the blurred invisibility wavered, and I caught a glimpse of one blue eye, blue as the sky lightnings that rose and flared and died. The lee of the tower dwarfed us with its massive bulk. Gamine clutched my arm, the cruel fingers digging bruisingly into my flesh. "Listen." I strained my ears. All I could hear was a low, not unpleasant humming, like the singing drone of great bees or high-tension wires. But the sound struck both aliens with horror. Narayan opened his lips. I dug frantically in my other pocket, brought out the toy Rhys had given me. At sight of it, Narayan's haggard face relaxed a little. He caught it from me with quick hands. "Free of Adric," he breathed with that swift erasure of tension I had seen before. He drew a long, moaning sigh. He closed his eyes for a moment. Somewhere above us, a scream rang out, a cry bestial in its mad appeal. It broke the static immobility that held us, and Narayan, sliding the toy inside his shirt, turned and began to run around the tower, Gamine and I panting at his heels. We came around the corner beneath an arching outcrop of stonework. No one needed to give orders. As one, we scrambled up on the ledge, crowding close together. I gripped my hand on the knife in my belt. It had a comforting feel. I needed that. A framed archway let us look down into the inside of the keep. Below us, a voice cried out despairingly, unbelievingly. "Adric!" we heard Sinara cry out. "Adric! No! Oh, no!" Under our combined weight, the glass shattered. We hurled inward. We found ourselves standing on a great shelf, about 10 feet above the interior floor of the keep, looking down at a scene framed in stark horror. Golden Karami, dwarfed Idris, Everin, stood in a close circle about a ring of coffins which gleamed crystal, glowed with scintillant radiance. In the hand of each of them was a tiny, jeweled, faceted toy, and in the coffins... Gamine screamed. "The Dreamers!" Not till then did we see Adric and what he was doing. In the center of the ring of coffins a dais rose upright, horribly altar-like, and a line of mindless slaves, nude, vacant-eyed, defiled before the altar. As each slave stepped forward, there was a shuddering moan from the others. The tiny swords rose and fell, and in a brilliant flame of blue light, the slave was not. And Adric, Sinara struggling between his hands, was thrusting her forward, into the space between the coffins, toward the nexus of the blue light, toward the sacrifice stone of the Dreamers. The sight put us beyond caution. We threw ourselves from the ledge, and went down into a writhing, sprawling mass of living flesh. A barked command from Idris, and the slaves swarmed on us, drowning us in smothering bodies. I kicked and sprawled and thrashed and scratched and bit my way to the top of the heap, and somehow, for a second, I rolled free. That instant was enough. I was on my feet, the knife in my hand. Dragging bodies clung at my heels. I kicked out savagely, felt my boots strike naked flesh, felt and heard the pulpy sound of a skull crushing under the impact of my heel. The sound rocked my stomach, but I was not in a position to be fastidious. My eyes were swimming in trickling blood. Gamine clawed and thrust free, and together we elbowed out of the press. Everin sprang at me. I thrust blindly with the knife in my hand, ripped into his shoulder, missing the throat by inches. I caught the toy from his hand as it fell free. A moment of the clinging, tearing melee, then we three, Gammon and Narayan and I, were standing back to back in the center of the ring of coffins. There was a long howl of pain and terror from Everin, and the 4 Narabedlans flung themselves backward in a panicked terror. From within the coffins, the Dreamers were waking. But Adric was no coward. He threw himself quickly forward, caught at Sinara again, and with all the force in his lean arms, he flung her, straight toward the nexus of blue light. Narayan and Gammon stood frozen, bound by the toys in their hands against the light, but I broke free. I passed straight across the cone of blue lightning. Unharmed. The blasting energy tingled pleasantly in my body as I caught Sinara in mid-air and reeled away from the force that would have meant annihilation for her. Narayan broke away from the paralysis momentarily and caught Sinara's staggering body from my arms. Then I felt the impact as Adric's tall, heavy body crashed against me, felt the shock as my fist smashed against his jaw, and heard him grunt as we locked into a clinch that carried us nearer and nearer to that center of blue energy. A moment we swayed there, at the very edge of the lightning. Then Everin's tensed cat body hit in the center of my back. Again the heat thrust needles through me. Adric was flung clear, but there was an arch of blue that spanned the vault, a wild scream like the death cry of a panther, and the toymaker was gone. Within the coffins the blue lights wakened, as if the last flare of energy had freed them. Quickly Idris and Karami ran forward. Quickly Adric leaped to join them, thrusting the talisman toys against the very lids of the coffins, but too late. The toys in the hands of Narayan and Gamine spat glaring blue fire, and step by step the Narabedlans retreated, farther, farther, farther. The coffins were suddenly empty. As if by magic, 3 old men and a woman of surpassing beauty materialized about Narayan and Gamine. In their faces I could distinguish a curious likeness to Narayan and to old Rhys, and Narayan, within the circle of the dreamers, reached out and flung the tattered veils from Gamine. A triumphant chant rushed sweetly from the lips of the spell-singer as the veils came away, and in the center of the mutants stood Gamine the dreamer, dwarfing them all by a pure majesty. The majesty of a dreamer who had never slept. A woman she was, slender and fair and very beautiful, and as like to Narayan as a twin sister. And I thought of Isis and the young Osiris, as the blue eyes blazed out and the lovely body arched upward in tall freedom from the shrouding veils. Blue lightning swirled and faded, and the dreamer's tower was bathed in trembling iridescent rainbows. Karami and Idris retreated step by step, slinking back into the shadows. Only Adric stood his ground. The rainbows died. The air was void and empty of energy. The dreamer stood looking on the crouching Karami with her hidden face, on the bent, gnarled dwarf, on Sonara, kneeling white and radiant, on Adric, who stood with his lips parted, staring at Gamine like a man released from a spell. It was Gamine who spoke, her eyes resting on Karami. "She has done much evil." The others clamored, but Gamine shook her head, long pale hair lifting electrically around her face. "No," she disclaimed softly. "Why should they die? They are only an old dwarf, a silly old fool who could not make up his own mind." Her eyes dwelt disquietly on Adric. "And Karami. They have no power. Now we are freed. Pity them. Now we are freed." Adric slowly drew himself upright. His slackly parted lips set firmly, and he looked at Narayan with a dispassionate, stubborn shrug. "Kill me, if you like." "No, Gamine." Narayan stepped toward the man in crimson. "Adric," he said in a strange, half-choked excitement, "I want to see what you saw before, to see what sent you away, to see the thing that drove you mad. Gamine's veils. Gamine, let him see. Show him, Gamine. Show him what he saw then." Gamine came forward slowly to where Karami knelt. "Stand up." Slowly Karami rose to her feet. There was no hope in her eyes, no mercy in Gamine's. The 2 pairs of eyes, cat yellow and blue, fought for a moment. It was Karami's that fell. The dreamer woman smiled faintly. "My brothers and my sisters," she said at last, "Karami is beautiful, is she not?" I suppose no woman on earth has ever been or ever will be as beautiful as Karami the Golden. She stood proudly, turning to Adric, and I saw longing and love break forth in the man's eyes. He gazed, and Karami laughed and held out her arms, and Adric, bemused, went toward her. "Hold him," commanded Narayan tersely. One of the dreamers made a curious sign with his left hand, and Adric was arrested, stood gripped in a vice of invisible force. "See," Gamine said in a ringing voice, "but now see Karami, shorn of the illusion her dreamer threw. See the form of Karami that she made me wear. This—" She reached out and touched Karami with the little talisman she held. There was a gasp of horror from many throats. "Karami, Karami the Golden, there are no words for the change that took place before our eyes. I was sick and retching with horror before the metamorphosis was half complete, and turned away my eyes. Sonara was sobbing softly into her skirt, but Adric, frozen, could not look away. Gamine's laugh, low and sweet and doubly deadly for its sweetness, reached my ears. "Shall I lend you my veils, sister?" she murmured, mocking, and again the horrible laugh. "No? Go forth!" Her voice was a lashing whip, and with a broken wail the thing that had been Karami threw up an arm across the staring sockets and fled away into the night, and we never saw it again. So that was the end of Karami the Golden. The end. A little later I found that Adric and I were staring stupidly at one another, puzzled, but without animosity. Sonara came and slipped an arm around Adric, and I turned away, embarrassed, for the man was sobbing like a child. I was amazed and sick with the enormity of all that I had seen and done. I stood and shivered and shook with deadly chill. I suppose it was reaction. "Steady." Narayan's steely hand on my shoulder kept me once again from making an ass of myself. "You've done us a big favor," he said after a few minutes. "I wish I had some adequate way of thanking you, not for myself, for millions of people. Perhaps one day we'll find a way of sending you back to your own world, but—" his shoulders moved negatively. "I can't say." Adric's lean, non-human face peered over Narayan's shoulder. He looked subdued and spoke with a curious humility. He sounded sane. "There will be a way some day. It will take time to find it now, but there will be." Spontaneously we grinned at each other. I could not hate this man. I knew him too well. I knew suddenly that we would be friends, which indeed is what happened. Narayan looked from one to the other of us, troubled. Then Gameen's intent face was at his elbow. "I'll see to these men," she said quietly. "Narayan, they need you, and it's your responsibility. They have to be told why they were wakened, and how. There are slaves to be freed, armies." Narayan glanced guiltily over his shoulder at the other dreamers, who stood huddled together in a bewildered little knot. "That's so," he acknowledged gravely, and went to his people. I watched him, feeling as if one friend here had deserted me, but it had to be that way. Narayan was not our kind. He was a sort of man who could remodel a world, but the look he sent us over his shoulder told Adric and I that we should, if we liked, have a share in that work. "Now, Mike Kenscott," said Gameen, "I want to talk to you." We left Adric and Sonara in that place, and I cast a wistful glance back at them. Sonara was lovely and very human, and, I suppose, I had hoped that in some way she would compensate for my enforced stay in this world. But there was Adric. Gameen and I stood on the steps of the Dreamer's Keep, and her voice, soft and wistful, mourned in the grey dawn. "No one ever knew I had the dreamer powers, except old Reese. Reese and I were bound together. He knew and kept me close to him, hid me and helped me. One day Adric found out. It changed Adric. We freed Narayan together. Then Karami made me what I was, what you saw. It hurt Adric, hurt something in him. I could have cured him in time, but Karami had him bewitched. She stripped him of power, of memory. I do not know, but perhaps some day Adric may remember that I was... "Gameen! Gameen!" Adric's voice cried from within, and the next moment he rushed forth, caught the dreamer woman in his arms, and his mouth met hers, and she stood swaying in his arms, laughing and crying together. Sonara, following slowly, smiled with gentle satisfaction. I said, stunned, "What?" Over Adric's shoulder, Gameen's blue eyes met mine in liquid satisfaction, and she finished her interrupted sentence. "I was Adric's wife," she said gently. Sonara's voice was tenderly humorless as we left them together in the glory of the rising sun. "Poor Gameen," she said, "and poor Adric too. I was sorry for them both. But I wish these men would make up their minds. I had an idea. "Adric's made up his mind," I said, turning my head a little toward the couple who stood, clasped, as if they could never let go. "I suppose—" I came a little closer to Sonara, who stood looking up at me with wide, innocent eyes and lips ingenuously parted. "I suppose that gives me the right to make up my mind, doesn't it?" She smiled. "Does it?" But her bright eyes had given me my answer, and I never had to make up my mind again. The End of Falcons of Narabedla by Marion Zimmer Bradley.